Yeah.
Okay, that's the right questions that. The second big one was when Ernest Barrett decided to put water and sewer system throughout the county. There weren't anything but septic tanks here, and you're never going to grow. And
Yeah.
he did it before he had to, got beat up, but that
As
allowed us
usual.
to grow.
Right.
And during that time, the school system K through 12 was floundering around, and that just people started building, and that shot it off. And then the Braves in Cobb County. Those were the three big things that shape this county, and Lockheed's still doing it.
Yeah.
So K through 12 is still doing it.
Mhm.
Braves will keep doing it.
Right.
So those are three biggies.
Right.
And we're a county now of 825,000 people, and got the more growth than just about any county in the nation right now.
It's
Right
fascinating.
and left.
It's fascinating. Well, you did a lot with the chamber, man.
Yeah, I did.
I didn't know the chamber was not as progressive as it was the last 10 years, because it was getting the Braves here has just proven to be a major coup. But navigating through that insanity.
Right.
I'll tell you three things that happened. Atlanta United professional soccer team is in Cobb County. They play their things the games downtown, but that's their corporate office, their practice fields, and everything. We got the Atlanta Brave and then the Atlanta Blaze, the lacrosse team.
Yeah.
We got all three professional sports in 3 years. That's never been done anywhere.
Yeah.
And the growth in businesses, since we put our economic development program in place after I got to this chambers, we're responsible now for 30,000 new professional jobs. And organizations like... So, again, just be relaxed. And Elvis, he says something wrong, hold him honest.
Yeah.
Seriously, we're just going to be casual. Don't let him go exaggerate.
Yep.
And Alex don't let him exaggerate. And if he's talking and you say, Lee, you ought to cover this, we're going to be able to slice it out.
We'll slice it out.
Yeah. So,
We've come out on the best side of this with Alice Ty before.
we have a hard stop at 2:45, and we should be in great shape.
Yeah.
And Ty and I've had them from 45 minutes to almost 2 hours and 45 minutes. So, okay, Lee, tell me a little bit about you, the person, where you grew up. What got you through this point in your life when you joined Lockheed. Briefly, just let us know who you are.
Few people realize that I was born in Georgia. And many people tell a story about a real life sharecropper. My parents were sharecroppers in Sassa, Georgia and Dawson, Georgia. My mom had a philosophy that you had two advantages: to be born to good parents and to be born in this country. So what to many appeared to be an obstacle, to her was a challenge. Born there in 1950, 1955, we moved to Florida. We actually lived in a fruit pickers camp. To make a long story short, from a vision of a lady, 8 kids who started in a humble beginning, all are college grads, most have postgraduate degrees, and we live as a legacy for my mother and father. Great work ethic.
What we've heard is a lot of people learn their values from their
Yeah,
parents. Unfortunately, that's not going on.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you can come back and repeat whatever
Yeah.
I say. If we,
Yeah, I was going to get to that, Dave. That's a good point.
Just go ahead.
I look back, and Dave, you asked me, and we've talked before. My mother told me that I had to earn my way. I could never remember my father not working. I also remembered I had to be a person of my word. So contracts never took precedence. The other thing was my mother always taught me if I wanted respect, I had to give it. And I had to respect my own integrity. And my dad was a soft-spoken person, but his work ethic, he never wanted to not earn his own way. So I think and I remember one cold night, Mother told me, you have to believe in something other than yourself, or you're shaping up for the biggest failure. So I contribute most of that to my parents. Proved out, I had good parents. I had great parents.
And that lets you go on through education
Yeah.
and the work experiences. Tell me about your educational journey, unless you got some other things to add about the 3 periods.
My educational journey,
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
it was interesting. My educational journey, I have to once attribute to my parents. My mom honestly believed that the way we would grow out of our situation was through faith and education and hard work. I can truthfully say, I used to tell folks on every parent and teacher's night, if there was a hurricane or a tornado outside, I used to tell the students, I can't act up because one lady is going to show up. She's going to sit on the front row in front of the teacher. And if I get a bad report card, I'm not going to survive to come to school the next day. Education was her total focus along with religion. So my education was a very interesting one. I went to Lincoln Park Academy, which at that time was one of the best schools in the country for African Americans before segregation. I had the privilege of being there when they made Lincoln Park Academy a junior college. And because the president of the junior college went to our church, I was allowed to sit in and do dual learning before dual learning was president. I came out of college and I was accepted to several things, but I decided to stay home and go to Bethune-Cookman University because at that time it was scholarship, and at that time most of us knew when we graduated you were going to go to war. I tested very well at Bethune-Cookman, and I should have. Came out of there, first job was General Motors. I was the GM Scholar. I was the GM Scholar twice. I had great mentors. I scare people with my education, but I can say my education was very well invested in. I went to very great schools. I have no reason to not be very successful when it came to education. Executive programs, tremendous training, Harvard, Indiana University, yes, Cambridge, almost anywhere I wanted to go. So I had a very, very, very diverse and great education. Plus, one of the greatest educations was growing up in a very place where you learn. You know, you learn and you were mentored, but also you learn from the school of hard knocks. You wasn't over sheltered, and there was a certain amount of excellence that was demanded of you. My parents did not tolerate lack of excellence.
It sounds like you got a part of education a lot of kids don't get today, because that creates work ethic, values, strong values have a lot to do with staying with it, because it's hard. I can't tell you, I went through engineering school at Auburn, and I was a co-op student. Well, I tell you what, sometimes I just wanted to quit so bad, just couldn't take it, wanted to quit, and my parents were the same way. There's just no such thing as quitting, so I did. Tell me about your journey at General Motors.
Well, it was interesting. My journey at General Motors was started with an interview that I wasn't scheduled to take. My roommate was interviewing with General Motors. I came up on campus. One of the interviewers came out, started talking to me. As the other interviewers would come out, they talked to me. I got, I think, 9 or 14 offers to come up to General Motors up north. From then, I got several jobs. And before I knew it, I chose the one closest to Florida because I thought it would be warmer. And that was in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was at a place called Detroit Diesel Allison Division of General Motors. It was the diesel and aircraft division. Interestingly, my first job was writing quality engineering routings for a T-56 engine out for receiving and inspection. Little would I know I would retire still looking at C-130s. T-56 engines later became the 2100D engines, which we helped develop and was used on the C-130s. Little did I ever dream that my starting and ending position would be the same.
So how did Lockheed recruit you? I know they back in those earlier days, they would spend any amount of money to get the right kind of talent. So, how did you go from that to Lockheed?
It was, the recruitment at Lockheed is a very interesting one, in as much as I knew Mickey Blackwell, I knew Terry Graham. Terry Graham had come to Indianapolis and he had met me. It wasn't like Lockheed and I were total strangers.
Yeah.
I knew Tom Burbidge. I had interviewed with Lockheed before, but I had chosen not to come to Lockheed. And this time, the interviews were for different people, and it was just the right time. It was the right time. I wanted to get closer. My mother had passed. My father was in Florida. Evelyn's, my wife's family was in Florida. I had had some illnesses, and I just wanted to get closer to home. And also, it was a challenge of Lockheed, because I would tell people Lockheed was the same company that wouldn't hire me out of college. So it was kind of a little bit of a vendetta. I wanted to come back and close that gap.
It's also a very critical time.
It was a very critical time. And I will say this, the recruitment of Lockheed was very well done. They spent a lot of time. It was very critical. You're right. It was a very critical time. It was a very scary time, too.
Did you come at the general manager level when you came over here to run the place?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I was promoted eventually within Lockheed to executive vice president. But when I came to Lockheed, it was a very critical time. It could have been a scary time,
Can
too.
you describe that turmoil at that
Yeah.
time?
Well,
Take us into the rooms.
Yeah.
it was not.
I'll just stop for a second. One of the things that we're trying to do, I meant to say this on front of you, is good stories.
Yeah.
And boy, have we heard some doozies. Because if people are watching a 90-minute documentary, they're not interested in just talking heads, even if they're interesting. But people love these stories because sometimes they educate you about what's going on. I'm sure when you came here, for example, this place was in turmoil.
Yeah,
There were probably some great meetings you
Yeah,
had and
yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Well, talk about the newspaper.
Yeah.
You were the right man.
Yeah. Here is the picture then. I am at a point in my life where I'm in Rolls-Royce Aerospace. My whole focus is really to get back closer to my dad and my family. I had been in corporate America, so there was nothing that was going to really scare me. Here is an actual conversation during my recruitment from Lockheed from two people that I really respected. One was Dane Hancock. The other one was Vance Kaufman. They said together, we are not going to pull any punches. There's racial turmoil at Lockheed. At that time, we were on national TV every night. I'm sitting there saying to myself, you are kidding me.
What year was that?
This is 2000. And the next thing was that our customer is no longer happy with us. Union relationship and a management relationship was in the pits. They were laying off.
So this was really a transformation.
This was a transformation. That didn't scare me because my focus was, I can improve that. I'm going home. I'm going back to my state of Georgia. It was unlike being afraid because most people didn't realize I was from Georgia. My relatives are in Georgia. My mother and father are in Georgia. So this is not as much of a turnoff, it's a challenge. The other thing is that I'll never forget was the newspaper articles. The same newspaper articles I had faced my entire life every time I got a job was that I was brought in because of my race. The same article I read 28 years before, I'm now reading 28 years later. And I remember looking at Vance and saying, isn't this comical? This is the same crap I've heard all my life. I'm still going home, and I remember my mother's words. If God be for you, who can be against you? And she always taught us, losing is not an option, and challenge can't become a fear.
You transformed 28 more years forward. A lot of things still haven't changed.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this kind of-
Yeah. So when we talk about the challenges of Lockheed, businesses go in cycles. There's ups and downs. Leadership comes and leadership goes. The important thing about Lockheed at that time, it was an opportunity for me to embrace the challenges, an opportunity for me to end my career, and those fears I had lived before. So it wasn't like I was running. But to kid you that there were not challenges, there were challenges. But I will say Vance, Kaufman, and Dane were very honest about it.
So,
There were protests.
Yeah, well, we even had people protesting outside the doors. I mean, let's face it, all of you in Cobb County were very aware of that. There were people protesting. There was turmoil. They were going to shut down the programs. There was a lot of interesting love going on at Lockheed at that time. A whole lot of love. And I'll never forget. I got to meet. One of the best conversations that I had was a meeting with Johnny Isaacson, who at that time was a United States congressman. And there are 3 meetings that I really remember that seem to resonate with me. The first one was telling Evelyn I was coming. And she looked at me and said, I have been with you since we were 15 years old. Why are you asking me that? So that was kind of touching. The next one was with Johnny Isaacson. They take you around and introduce you to Congress people. I had met Congress people all my life. Remotely knew of Congressman, now Senator Isaacson. And the conversation was very similar with his honesty. But he said something that really spoke. We need your help. He wasn't arrogant. He said, we need your help.
he was a great interview.
He was a genuine person, and anything I can do to help, I will. Those words meant so much. And he said the most important thing. I'm confident you'll make a big difference. Johnny Isaacson. The next one was a man by the name of Winston Strickland.
Strict.
People call him Strick. I had never met a person that could rise above all foolishness, all of the minutia, and talk as community orientated as Winston Strickland. His thing was, the best thing for Cobb County is for Lockheed to work. And I'm going to help you any way I can. And he lived up to that. But the thing that got me about Winston Strickland, he didn't talk about a segment of Cobb County. Winston Strickland talked about the entirety of Cobb County. He didn't segment into race, creed, or he didn't go that way. He talked totally about the betterment of Cobb County. That was unbelievable.
I just remember so many people that were high-level political people that went to Strick to get advice.
Yeah.
You know, you go to his barbecue place, his haircut, and you know, the county managers and so forth and so on. You wanted to ask Strick's opinion.
Yeah.
And sometimes he'd help you get there, wherever you're trying to go. And you're exactly right. Race was never an issue. It was about people.
It was about people.
Yeah.
Strick, and we call him Strick. Strick might have been an angel dropped off here. He may have been the closest thing to an angel dropped off here. Because not only could Strick tell you when other people were doing wrong, Scrick could tell everybody, and most people have a preference politics or preference religion. After they look at what color you are, what political party you are, how you dress, what sex you are, what nationality you are, then they decide whether you're right or wrong. Scrick, it was totally, you were either right or you were wrong. There were no preferential politics or preferential decision making. You have to. I pass by his restaurant, Dave, now, and I tear up. I tear up because Winston Strickland was one of the most unique human beings, along with Johnny Iverson, that God has ever placed on this earth. They rise above it. Those conversations, and you talk about the wondrous entanglements. You talk about the right time at Cobb County. There was a lot going on wrong at Cobb County, but there are a lot of people that were willing to attack the serious issues. You can't leave out Connells, you can't leave out Brumbrys, you can't leave out Olins, you can't leave these people out. The Barneses, you can't leave out the Brumbrys, you can't leave these people out, the Marcus, because the difficult situations and the difficult conversations had to be had.
Well, Lee,
you couldn't excuse them. I mean, you couldn't. There were conversations that were not for the faint in heart. And you have to include Deanne, Miss Bonner, because the conversation stepped on everyone's toes, because everyone's toes needed stepping on to rise to the level to save Cobb County. And that is a difficult journey, because let me tell you, that thing called pride, jealousy, hate, anger, all those things have to be temporarily taken out. And let me tell you, you can't leave these folks out, because they had to go back and face their constituencies and not only say good things, but say things they may not want to hear. And that takes courage. And I'm going to tell you something. I can tell you, that is a hot room to sit in when you got to eat some salt on your own wounds. That is a hot room. And I remember that, and I remember the people in the room that would always rise above it, and we stayed connected long enough during difficult times to solve the issues.
Okay, so you came to Lockheed in year 2000 in that time frame. Now it's 2019, so we're approaching roughly 20 years. Would Lockheed have survived if you hadn't showed up?
I look at Lockheed at certain points in history. The first one was in 1942, the Bell plant. The next one was the crucial decision in 1950 to bring the passenger plane here. And then in the 60s, when they decided that they were going to build something here in Marietta forever. And then the first flight of the C-130, all those are transitions. The awarding of the C-5 contract by President Kennedy, the awarding of the F-22, P-3. But let's get beyond that. There were other critical decisions because Lockheed was in flux during those periods. I think, would Lockheed have survived? I can say this. Lockheed was better off because I came. But Lockheed was also better off because of the Haltons, Ormsbys, Blackwells. It was better off because of the Canestras. Each one of us had to be better, the Burbaches. Each one of us played a role. Maybe my role is more pronounced, but its own shoulders and its own great moments and its own that. I think for this particular time at Lockheed, that the wondrous entanglement that included Lee Rhyant was probably the best time. For this particular time, all the skills and things that I had learned, for this particular time, that was a part of Lockheed's journey that would carry it on, that we end up with the Coopers, the Shooks, the McLeans. But let me tell you, it was a tough journey. Required the skills. But like people say, certain people have certain skills for certain periods of time. And I think I had those skills.
Did you follow Mickey? Were you right after him, Mickey Blackwell?
I was right after Burbage.
Burbage, okay. 'Cause Mickey was before Burbage then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was and this would be embarrassing to put in there, but there was a lot of stuff going on with corporate and Mickey and
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Do you want to talk at all about Fort Worth and
Oh.
the critical role you played, and also
Let
they
me-
didn't want to give us any F-22,
Yeah.
and you changed that.
Let me say this.
I think there's some funny stories around that.
Let me say this. I think Bob Stevens, Ralph Heath, Dane, Senator Isaacson, Ralph. I think the conversations that had to be had to keep Marietta whole, because there were times that entities of a business will place yourself where the business makes a conscious decision to get rid of you or to keep you. And that's a conscious decision. And a lot of times it's because of your behavior, the customer no longer likes you, or the corporation no longer likes you, or is not popular to keep you. But that, to me, was just a normal part, because, I'm GM legacy, I'm Rolls-Royce legacy. So opening up and shutting down plants, I've seen plenty of them. Well, let me tell you, we didn't like any of that thunder going on about Marietta at that time. Marietta at that particular time was not a favorite son.
For what reason?
Well, I think the customer had lost confidence. The other thing was socially, we wasn't attractive. I mean, we were having protests, let's face it. Labor unrest was at its height. And let me tell you, the old thing of any publicity is good media, that's a lie. The best publicity is no publicity when you're trying to stay. So the corporation, and let's be sure we put this in, the corporation weighed a lot of things. The challenge now becomes, can we sway them in our behaviors, in our relationship with our customer, in improving our products, and also our behaviors as community citizens, and our behaviors as technicians and researchers. Can we show now our worth to the corporation? And I think during that period, we were able to show that our value to the corporation was good. And the Vance Kaufmans and the Stevens decided that Marietta was the best place along with the board. So we went from ugly duckling to a good looking duckling, and they could maintain us. I'm not one of these that say you get grandfathered in anything. You have to remember, I'm raised by two parents who said, end of the day, earn your way. Be a person of your word. So, and look at yourself first. And remember, they taught me, before I go jump on anybody, I had to look at Marietta. And the other thing was, I was at a period in history where I didn't want any credit. Something happened to me, and I don't know whether you guys put something in a drink. Scrick, when I was down there trying to eat one of those chicken sandwiches, he put some sauce on it that wasn't right. I fell in love with the people of Marietta. I fell in love with the employees of Lockheed Martin. And I fell in love with Cobb County. And I was willing to fight. And I'm not sure I had planned on that.
Yeah.
That's good.
You guys are real good.
That was good.
All right. Do you got any additional stuff in around that 2000 period? Because again, we're looking for milestones. That sounds like that was a
Tell the
huge
story. We want the story.
Yeah. Anything you can think about? Now?
Well, let me add one more thing too. And let's talk about a government relationship.
Yeah. Okay. Should Alice be in here on that discussion?
Al's can come in on the community and stuff.
Okay. All right. Good.
Government relationships. I cannot leave out the wonderful people of the United States government that worked in Marietta. They were tough. They proudly, and I would say diligently, carried the mantle of their responsibility to represent the government and its people and the soldiers. But let me tell you something. Those people were first class. Those people were first class. A lot of times you hear about adversarial roles. Those people were first class. I always say you cannot make it unless your customer is willing to give you a fair chance, and they gave us a fair chance.
You know, there's a legacy of Lockheed really during this whole period of time. We were trying to put together a community program around diversity. I don't know if you remember this, about 7 or 8 years ago. And what we found out in studying is Lockheed had been doing that for 25, 30 years, and it was just beginning to be something companies were starting to do.
You know, Crawford, Dr. Laritz said something that resonates with me now. Emotions are great passengers, but they are terrible drivers. And I think when we took the emotions out and we put strategy, performance, an attitude of excellence, correction of behaviors, and all the tenets of being successful, when we took out all that emotion, the same thing with Cobb County. Here are the things we have to do to get better. Personal pride is an emotion. Drive is not an emotion. All those things, belief in Cobb County. When we took those things out, even at Lockheed Martin or in Cobb County, Dave, that's when our success really started. And I listened to John Williams could have made a lot more money elsewhere. But he chose to sacrifice. I look at Deanne. I heard some conversations of Deanne Bonner that it took a lot of courage to do. But she knew for Cobb County to grow, you had to step forward. The coalition of Alice, Deanne, and that group, working all those many varied events that required a diverse mindset, was one of the reasons that Cobb County excelled. And you have to give Otis Brumby. Otis could either be 100% for you or 100% against you.
Well, we've had some interesting discussions.
And when I talked to Otis at the Georgian, Otis Brumby at the Georgian Club, I'll never forget this. Otis told me, if you never lie to me, I'll be your best ally. If you lie to me, I'll be your biggest enemy. And in walked a little guy named Bill Kinney. And he said the same thing. But they became, even with difficult conversations, they became an ally. They would call and give me advice, but they kept their word. And I kept mine. I never lied to them. Now, was I afraid to tell them some of that stuff? But I never lied to them. And I always say, unless you have that wondrous entanglement, community, industry, government, local people, the on the record or the under talked about influences, you're not going to win this game. The phone calls that you get aren't necessarily the ones that get you across. It's the phone calls that people make on your behalf are usually the ones that tear down the barriers.
Yeah, but as I've gone through a career of almost 50 years myself, I can go back to a handful of meetings where a big decision was made. It's a fork in the road, we call it, and that's what we've been using, where you can go left or you can go right, and the outcomes are very different. And I suspect there were meetings in Fort Worth where maybe some people wanted you to go that way and others wanted you to go this way. Like, I guess the F-22 program could very well, the most sophisticated airplane in the world, there's people I assume that want to build that plane out.
Well, let me say this. In my GM days, I learned something. that besides being a place for things to happen, location of aircraft or where you put this model, it also calls jobs, community content, economic development. So the reality of that was people want to put as much as they can in their area, and it becomes a tad bit selfish. Anyone would be disingenuous to say you would cut off your right arm to help someone else's right arm. That's not going to happen. There were difficult conversations. And let me tell you, the fork in the road is normally not taking the easy decision. The easy decision is normally the road you shouldn't go down. The fork becomes when you have to create that debate, you have to make your case, and you have to refuse to go away. I think a lot of the decisions that affected Marietta was we had to create a debate, or we had to reverse the decisions. But that's throughout our corporate world. I'm always amazed when people say, and those of us in this room, that comes down to the key will of maybe 1 to 4 people. The ultimate, this hardcore decisions to do something will come down to convincing ultimately 1 to 4 people in that whole big group. And then if they have a board, the influence is on the board. Dave, you know that. Alice, you know that. Evelyn, you know that. It's not a great big decision. And we were able to get those 1 to 4. And it only takes 51% of the vote.
One thing is in John Sherholt's book, and anytime somebody writes about especially a transformation or decision that went on, do we build it here, we build it there, it takes courage.
Oh.
It takes a lot of courage, and with potential negative consequences to your career. And you have to pick and choose those battles. You can't battle on everything.
I want to say this on the record. I look back over my career, and decisions to where you build or research things were the most difficult, created the most grudges, had the most emotions, created a lot of friends, and has still created a lot of enemies. They are not easy decisions. They are trying. I have some decisions, you look back over that and all of us can relate to it. But they are not just easy decisions. They are hardcore. And I tell you, my wife can tell you, I would come home and you would lose a contract, and you are losing jobs of hundreds and thousands of people. And as you're driving down that road, sometimes you would get out of the car and throw up because you understood the economic impact. So I don't blame anyone for wanting to have something. But I tell you one thing, when they were going to take food, clothing, and housing out of these folks' mouths, I was going to fight like a wounded dog, because that's what I'm supposed to do. And I expect them to fight like a wounded dog. But they should never expect me to give up.
So, Lee, you may not think about it, but you changed history. If you hadn't showed up, different things would have happened. Mm-hmm. So, right. Where you decide to go to college, you go here, you go there, and history changes. I went to Auburn, and there's a long trail. I ended up marrying Pam, and now we got great-grandchildren. Valdosta State. How does it make you feel to know you changed history in a big way?
I think my parents called it guts. We called it courage. No guts, no glory. I don't think history has ever been changed by a coward in a positive way. I think history is changed with courage. You have to accept that defeat may be an option, but not fighting is. I think whatever parts of history, I've been the first African American, depending on who's reciting it, 11 to 17 times. That means that three things happen. Those who looked like me didn't know what to expect. Those who didn't look like me didn't know what to expect. And I didn't know what to expect.
That's going to be in the video.
Also, certain things had to happen. Someone who didn't look like me had to come across and help me because I didn't know. Those who looked like me had to trust me in doing something that innately may seem challenging to them. And then I had to be humble. I had to realize that Lee Rhyant, for him to grow, he had to depend on other people, he had to learn, and he had to earn his way. And I'm going to tell you something, Dave. There is nothing worse than every other conversation someone would have with you to remind you of what your color is. And people would do it one of several ways. Sometimes they will remind you to imply that you shouldn't be where you are. Sometimes they would remind you to say that you're carrying the burden of everyone else. And sometimes they would remind you just because they were happy for you and wanted to help you. I had to realize the last one occurred.
What's the hardest decision that you've made in the business world? Can you think of one or two decisions that you just pondered over, knowing it was going to affect a lot of people, that sort of thing? We can come back to it because Alex, you may think of something, particularly with Lockheed. Any of the real hard decisions, when it's all said and done, it was Lee Ryan's going to have to make a decision. Everybody backed away and said, "Okay, boss, you got to make the hard decision." Can you think of anything right off the top of your head?
One of the hardest decisions was doing a union negotiations where we had been going through it. And something came out in the paper that wasn't true about a comment that I supposedly had made about the president. And I'm not going to kid you, the president of the union. I'm not going to kid you by saying that he hadn't said some bad stuff about me that may be not true. But I knew if we stayed in that dilemma, that all those folks out there, and it was getting to the point where it was getting a little out of hand.
What year was that sort of really?
That was about 80. That was about 80. About 80. It's right in that period. I'm sorry. 2002 or 4, stuff like that.
I actually remember that.
It was contentious. The city was getting into it. Everybody was getting into it. We were having soldiers fighting, and I remember calling him. And here's what was honestly going in my mind. Debating whether I should give in. And I looked out the window and I saw those employees. And I said, I'm going to swallow my pride and I'm going to call him. And that was the hardest decision that I had to make at Lockheed. Not the fighting with Fort Worth or fighting with because I was used to it. But this was mano a mano. And I could tell by his voice that he was pondering the same phone call. And let me say this. At that time, I gained a lot of respect for him, but I gained more respect for myself. Because those hard decisions are not decisions that you feel good about. In between the persona of Lee Rhyant, there was a person that was actually taking this personal. And I had to rise above it. And that was a hard decision. The other hardest decision was my father died. Was coming back to do a
Speech for your high school.
speech at Lassiter High School. And it was I think it was the first time they'd had Martin Luther King Day or a celebration. And I had promised the person that was doing it that I'd do it, but little did I know my father was going to die. And the interesting part about it, I'll never forget, the principal that day didn't show up. Now, I'm not saying why, but I have a good, but I remember. But what I remember was toying over that decision to come back because I got to go back and bury my father. The reason that I had come here in the first place, I'm now burying in less than 2 years of being here. I'm burying my father. And I remember coming back, and I'll never forget it. I remember the kids at Lassiter High School being so professional that I said to myself, there's hope for this generation because these kids are far, far in front of where those of us in our presence is. And you could talk to Alex. They were singing songs. And what really got me was that I had mentioned about going through all this stuff with your father, wishing things you would have said, us not being as open. And I remember telling the students about that. And after the program, a large number of students lined up to tell me how sorry they were.
And you got letters.
I got letters. You got letters. You know, and it transformed this whole thing about old people carrying wars and angers and dissent meant that the next generation moves on and they have grown. And I'm telling you, those were harder decisions because I'm at a stage in my career where I've had the ugly decisions. I've had guys telling me that the place is finna get sold. I've had folks telling me we're going to shut down this part of the operation, or you're going to go here and close this plant down. I've had all the hard stuff, but that stuff still resonates with you.
Just quickly,
Sure.
you're talking about the union. One thing that I really remember is the leadership team that you built. They were upset because I remember tires had been, nails in the tires because the union unrest was horrible, and the leadership team was upset. And you reminded everybody that come Monday,
Yeah.
we all had to work together.
Yeah.
And it put a whole different spin.
Yeah, you talk about after the negotiations, and then you say, because those are difficult times. I have 2 points with the union that I remember. Getting my staff together and telling them, we're going to have to rise high because those are our employees. And when the election is over, when the negotiations is over, we're going to have to come back in here and work. The other one was one of the presidents of the union took sick. And I said I was going to go see him in the hospital. And people told me I shouldn't go. And I said, I'm going. When I got to the hospital, he had told the people there, when this guy comes, you guys treat him nice. He's passing with pancreatic cancer. We prayed together. At a gathering, he asked me to speak. That shows you that certain thing transcends that confrontation. Respect, compassion, and back to my father and mother, integrity.
You may not know this, but when I was in the hospital, I told you that almost died, really, and I'd never had, family came and visited after the first week. I never had anybody from the community visit me except him.
Wow.
And he wasn't supposed to come in, but he made his way in.
Oh.
And I always remember that. We'll obviously have some time shortage. I want to talk to something that really has to do with the history of Lockheed, and that's the relationship with your customer. Most people, when we talk about General Motors, I would be a customer of their car. You have a unique customer. It's the United States government and the military organ.
I tell you to say
You did, boss. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yours was Air Force, et cetera, and also the United States government. And that set of relationship, forget Fort Worth for a minute, forget the Union you got a big customer thing going on there.
Well,
Talk a little bit about that.
Let me talk about the relationship. Your journey takes an interesting plight over the years. When I was with General Motors, I was in the aerospace division. And we made the T-56 engine, TF-41, a lot of military, so a lot of military people would come. I was one of the youngsters who would get to tour the military people around, or when they would send their captains and lieutenants. And it was a job that, depending on what side you were, it was either a good job or a bad job. So I got to tour them around, and I actually started to understand their business. There was a guy named Lloyd Fix. He was a government inspector. He, for some reason, either felt sorry for me, but he sat me down one day and he told me about the military specs, about what they should do, and his words were, just like at Allison, that's what they call us, you have ugly people, we have ugly people. But we also have more pretty people than ugly people. Never lie to us, be honest with us, and never get involved in our politics. I kept that in mind. Now, when you come to a place where sitting every day is 200 people whose job it is to watch over you, that becomes an issue if you don't do it. What I always tried to do was exactly what Lloyd told me to do. Lloyd has passed, but I always never wanted to surprise him. I wanted to be honest. I never wanted to take the warfighter for granted. And I would start every event saying at Lockheed Martin, we never forget who we're working for. The men and women of our armed forces and armed services. Freedom is not free. It comes with a price. Will those who have served and those who are serving, please raise your hand, and we applaud it. That was my tribute to Lloyd Fix, to remind me every day that this was about the customer.
I heard you say that a lot in different speeches. And I will ask you a question before I forget it. One of the things that Ty will need as a final product is what he calls B-roll. It's video that you can use, and we're free to use it, of Lockheed, airplanes flying, all that kind of stuff, with your voice in the background. Is that possible? I mean, are y'all still connected enough you can get a sign-off for us to use some of that video stuff?
No, I mean, obviously Lee is.
I'll call out there and see.
Absolutely.
You know, it's just the pictures of airplanes flying around, all that kind of
We'll call out there.
Yeah, because one of those videos actually had those words.
Oh no! I'm sorry.
And see, that to me, that answered the whole question about the customer. You never forget who they are,
Right.
and use the same principles your parents taught you
Yeah.
in that relationship with your customers.
Well, what Lloyd was telling me was that, and a lot of times people forget this. Lloyd Fix told me basically, don't forget that's a human being sitting across that table you're talking to. Don't forget that's a human being that's signing off. You know, they have their duties. But remember, these are human beings. They have feelings, they have emotions, and they have pride just like you. Keep that in mind and you'll be okay. And it's kind of funny. We take that for granted. You can get in a fight with somebody and you forget that sitting right across that table is a human being that has emotions, feelings. They're internalizing things, and it was pretty poignant. And I always would say that because it was my tribute to Lloyd. But it meant so much to me because I would take these guys around and they'd have some precious moments. There's always some precious moments between the government and industry. There are precious moments between the government and industry. Trust me. There are precious moments. But there are precious moments between union and management. There's precious moments between corporate and locale. And there were plenty of precious moments between Fort Worth and Marietta.
That's a hard job.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna get the family into this
Okay.
because nobody can do the kind of job you did without